Nothing compares to the pain of losing a child, a grief so immense it cannot be put into words. In this video, we explore 5 of the most disturbing and heartbreaking child deaths ever recorded. These devastating cases stunned families, communities, and the world, leaving behind grief that time could never soften. On the afternoon of February 12, 1993, 2-year-old James Bulger vanished from a bustling shopping center in Bootle, England. He had been holding his mother's hand one moment, and the next he was gone. Closed-circuit television footage captured the last image of James alive, walking away with 2 older boys. What followed would become one of the most haunting and heartbreaking criminal cases in British history. Robert Thompson and John Venables, both just 10 years old at the time, had been skipping school that day, a habit not unfamiliar to them. Instead of returning home, they spent hours wandering around the New Strand shopping center. At the mall, the two spent their time watching young children closely. But it wasn't just some innocent people watching. Robert and John were selecting a target. Earlier that day, they had attempted to lead away another toddler, but were stopped by the child's mother. They also shoplifted several items, including sweets, batteries, a troll doll, and a can of blue paint. James Bulger had been at the shopping center with his mother, Denise. At around 3:40 p.m., while she paid for her purchases at a butcher's shop, James wandered slightly out of reach. That small moment of distraction gave Robert and John the opportunity to approach the toddler, take him by the hand, and lead him away. By 3:42 p.m., James had left the center in the company of 2 strangers. What followed was a harrowing 2.5-mile walk through Liverpool. Along the way, the visibly injured and crying toddler was seen by approximately 38 witnesses. Some observed his distress, his bruises, or his reluctance to follow the older boys. Several people confronted the pair. On each occasion, Robert and John gave false explanations, claiming James was a younger brother or a lost child they were helping find for the police. A few people expressed concern, but no one decisively intervened. The boys stopped at the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, where James was dropped on his head, causing facial injuries. At one point, his cries drew the attention of a passerby, but once again no action was taken. They pulled the hood of his jacket over his injuries in an attempt to hide them. Multiple witnesses saw James being hit, dragged, or mistreated. One even saw Robert kick him in the ribs. Still, no one stepped in to stop the abuse. Despite repeated chances for rescue, James was never saved. At one moment, an elderly woman approached and offered to help, but she accepted their explanation and let them go. Another woman considered taking James herself, but backed off when the person she asked to watch her own child refused. Eventually, the boys reached Walton, where they lingered near the Walton Lane police station. But instead of going inside, they led James to a secluded railway embankment. There, between 5:45 and 6:30 p.m., they inflicted a series of brutal and violent acts. They threw the stolen blue paint into James's eye, kicked and stomped on him, hurled bricks and stones, and inserted batteries into his body. Finally, they dropped a 22-pound iron bar onto his head, fracturing his skull and causing at least 10 separate skull fractures. In total, James sustained 42 injuries. Experts were unable to determine which blow had ultimately caused his death. Afterwards, Robert and John laid James's body across the railway tracks, weighing his head down with rubble in an attempt to make the incident appear like an accident. A train later severed the toddler's body. His remains were discovered 2 days later by 4 boys looking for footballs, just 200 yards from a police station. The investigation quickly progressed after enhanced CCTV images were broadcast nationally. A woman recognized John and called the police. Both boys were arrested shortly after. Forensic evidence linked them directly to the crime. Blue paint matched James's wounds, and his blood was found on both boys' shoes. John's shoe showed signs of force used in kicking, and a bruise on James's face matched Robert's footwear. Robert and John were charged with the killing and abduction of James on February 20th. At trial, they were tried as adults and ultimately found guilty on November 24th, 1993, becoming the youngest individuals convicted of such a grave crime in modern British history. In 2001, both were released on parole for life and given new identities. Robert has not reoffended, but John has repeatedly violated his parole, including being jailed twice for possession of disturbing images involving children. His repeated offenses have reignited public outrage, leading to petitions and parliamentary debates over how he was managed in the justice system. In March 2024, a renewed call for a public inquiry was brought before Parliament. Despite more than 200,000 signatures, the government declined to launch a full investigation. James's mother, Denise Fergus, continues to campaign to keep John behind bars permanently. James Bulger's short life was taken in the most brutal way, leaving behind a wound that has never truly healed. On the evening of February 7, 2007, 6-year-old João Helio Fernandes Vieites was riding home through Rio de Janeiro with his mother, sister, and a family friend. The family had just left a religious gathering, and João, the only son of Elson Lopes Vieites and Rosa Cristina Fernandes, was seated in the back of his mother's silver Opel Corsa. The streets of Oswaldo Cruz, though familiar to the Carioca family, would soon become the site of one of the most horrifying crimes in modern Brazilian history. João was a bright, cheerful child. That night, just after 9 p.m., his mother Rosa stopped the car at a red light at the intersection of João Vicente and Henrique de Melo streets. Suddenly, 3 young men burst out of a nearby taxi and surrounded the vehicle, 2 of them brandishing handguns. They forced the car's occupants out at gunpoint. Rosa, who had previously been assaulted on the street, knew not to resist. In a desperate attempt to free her son, she rushed to the back seat to unbuckle his seatbelt. But one of the armed men pushed her aside and slammed the door before João could be freed. As the attacker sped off, João's body was caught outside the vehicle, still fastened by the seatbelt. The car dragged the child for 7 kilometers through the streets of multiple neighborhoods. Witnesses reported seeing his small body strike curbs, speed bumps, and even the rear wheel. Many people screamed in horror. At least one man on a motorcycle attempted to approach the vehicle to alert the assailants, but was met with a gun pointed at him by 18-year-old Diego Nascimento da Silva, who was seated in the passenger seat. The assailants made no effort to stop and showed complete disregard for the cries and pleas of those watching. Police later determined that the assailants knew they were dragging a child. They drove in a zigzag pattern, likely in an attempt to dislodge the body, but the seatbelt held firm. According to witnesses, one of the carjackers callously shouted that the figure being dragged was just a Judas doll, showing chilling detachment from the reality of what they were doing. The horror continued until the vehicle reached a dead-end street in Cascadura, where the attackers parked, searched the car for valuables, and escaped down a nearby alley, leaving João's body entangled and lifeless. Unbelievably, the assailants returned home for dinner with their families and then attended a church party that same night. Within hours, the civil police, acting on tips from the family of one of the suspects, apprehended all 5 individuals involved. The oldest, Carlos Eduardo Toledo de Lima, age 23, was the group's leader and the car's driver. His younger brother Ezequiel, who was 16 at the time, admitted to slamming the car door on the seatbelt. Others included Diego Nascimento da Silva, 18, Tiago de Abro Matos, 19, and Carlos Roberto da Silva, 21. The brutal nature of the crime shook Brazil. Public outrage exploded. Mass protests, marches, and religious services followed, with thousands calling for peace and demanding justice. On March 10, 2007, a large crowd retraced the exact route João had been dragged, a symbolic act of remembrance and protest. João's parents led the march, supported by hundreds of people carrying signs, banners, and flowers. High-ranking officials, including Rio's public security chief, joined the public in condemning the crime and calling for systemic change. Media outlets, artists, and public figures echoed the public's grief. João's face appeared on magazine covers, and his name was honored during the Rio Carnival by several samba schools. Parks and public spaces were named after him, including Parque Menino João Helio and a renamed square in Cascadura, near where his body was found. Sculptures and plaques dedicated to his memory carried messages pleading for peace. On January 30, 2008, nearly a year after the murder, the 5 men were sentenced by Judge Marcela Assad Karam. She noted that the noise from Joao's body striking the vehicle and street would have made it impossible for the attackers not to realize what was happening. Despite this, they continued their course. Joao Helio's death became a national symbol of the consequences of unchecked violence. For many, it represented not only a child's tragic end, but a profound failure of society to protect its most vulnerable. His life was stolen in a manner that defied comprehension, and the collective grief that followed remains etched into Brazil's memory. Virginia Graham Baker, known as Graham to her loved ones, was a bright and compassionate 7-year-old girl with a gentle spirit and a fierce loyalty to those around her. A dedicated swimmer and diver since the age of 3, she had already earned a third-place medal in a local dive meet by the age of 6. Graham was also a twin, and her deep bond with her sister Jackie was matched only by her protective nature and empathy, particularly toward other children who struggled. She had just completed first grade and was full of life and promise when tragedy struck in an unimaginable way. On June 15, 2002, Graham was attending a family friend's graduation party in Fairfax County, Virginia. The day was warm and children gathered to enjoy the pool and the connected hot tub. As someone confident in the water, Graham had no hesitation about playing in the tub. But beneath the surface, a hidden danger lurked. When she sat on the spa's floor drain, the powerful suction pulled her down with such force that she became trapped underwater. Despite being a strong swimmer, she was unable to escape. Graham's mother, Nancy Baker, quickly realized something was wrong when she saw her daughter motionless beneath the surface. She dove in, pulling frantically, but the suction held Graham in place. It would later be estimated that the force keeping her underwater was roughly 700 pounds. 2 men at the party ultimately managed to dislodge her, but only by breaking the drain cover. By the time they freed her, it was too late. Graham had drowned. Her official cause of death was listed as suction entrapment due to a faulty drain cover. Graham, the youngest of 5 daughters and the granddaughter of former Secretary of State James Baker III, was mourned by many, but her death did not fade quietly. Nancy, devastated by the preventable nature of the incident, began a determined campaign to change pool safety standards across the country. What followed was a 5-year effort to raise awareness, lobby lawmakers, and overcome resistance from parts of the pool and spa industry. With the help of organizations like Safe Kids Worldwide, and with support from Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Nancy pushed for legislation that would prevent future tragedies. The result was the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act, signed into law in December 2007. The act mandated the installation of anti-entrapment drain covers and other safety devices in public pools and spas across the United States. It was incorporated as Title 14 of the U.S. Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. The law also empowered the Consumer Product Safety Commission to launch the Pool Safely campaign, aimed at educating the public on drowning and entrapment prevention. Graham's legacy endures even today. Her story moved lawmakers, communities, and families to act. Nancy continues to speak about her daughter, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of empathy and courage. Graham had always stood up for others, whether defending her twin sister from teasing or befriending classmates who felt alone. Now her name stands for safety, change, and protection for countless children she has never met. In 1991, Connor Clapton was a bright, lively 4-year-old with an infectious energy and boundless joy. The son of British rock musician Eric Clapton and Italian actress Laurie Del Santo, he had recently begun to form a close bond with his father, who had made the commitment to become a more present and involved parent. Just a day before the unthinkable happened, the two had shared their first full day alone together, a special outing to a circus on Long Island that left Connor excited and chattering about clowns and elephants. Eric, moved by the experience, promised to be the kind of father his son deserved, but that promise would never be fulfilled. Born in 1986, Connor was raised primarily by Laurie following her separation from Eric. Despite the circumstances, Eric remained involved in his son's life and credited Connor's birth with his decision to pursue sobriety. By the late 1980s, Eric had overcome a long history of substance abuse, and was 3 years sober at the time of Connor's death. Their relationship, though relatively new in terms of daily involvement, had become central to Eric's identity and recovery. On the morning of March 20th, 1991, Connor was staying with Lori in a rented apartment on the 53rd floor of the Galleria building in Manhattan. That morning, a janitor had cleaned the living room windows and left one wide open. Unusually, there were no guards installed on the windows. While Lori was in the bathroom and a nanny was present in the apartment, Connor ran playfully through the living room, excited to see his father again. The janitor, having noticed the risk, warned the nanny to watch the child, but it was too late. In a split second, Connor jumped onto the low window ledge, where he often liked to press his nose against the glass, and fell through the open window. He plunged 490 feet and landed on the roof of a nearby 4-story building. He died instantly. Eric, who had been staying in a nearby hotel and was preparing to take Connor to the Bronx Zoo later that day, received the devastating phone call from Lori moments later. Stunned and unable to process what he had heard, he walked the 7 blocks to the apartment, passing the emergency vehicles gathered outside. Paralyzed by fear and disbelief, he did not approach the scene. Days later, at the funeral held at St. Mary Magdalene Church in Ripley, Surrey, just a short distance from Eric's birthplace, Connor was laid to rest. He was buried on March 28th, 2 days before Eric's 46th birthday. The service was attended by family, friends, and fellow musicians, including George Harrison and Phil Collins. In the months that followed, Eric retreated from public life. He traveled to Antigua, where he spent nearly a year in isolation, playing a small Spanish guitar and reflecting on his loss. In the solitude of his rented cottage, he wrote and rewrote songs, trying to climb out of the emotional depths that had consumed him. It was during this period that he composed Tears in Heaven, a song that gave voice to his pain and longing. Released in 1992, it went on to win 3 Grammy Awards and became one of his most beloved songs. A few days before his death, Connor had written his first letter to his father. In it, he simply wrote, "I love you." The letter arrived at Eric's London home just after the funeral. The timing and the message would stay with Eric for the rest of his life. The death of Connor Clapton was a devastating tragedy. For Eric, it was a defining moment that reshaped his identity, deepened his sobriety, and inspired a legacy of music born from immeasurable grief. Trey Cooley was just 14 years old when his life ended in a sudden, unimaginable tragedy. A bright student at Bowles Junior High School in Arlington, Texas, Trey was known for his commitment to causes like Bulldogs Against Drugs and his passion for shooting sports, which he shared with his father. On a fall weekend in 1991, he chose to accompany his father to a shooting competition at the Dallas Pistol and Revolver Club. Unaware that a single moment would shatter everything, Trey's father, Leland Butch Cooley II, was a judge at the event. That morning, he gave his son the option to sleep in or join him. Trey chose to come along, eager to help out by running score sheets during the competition. He spent much of the day near the airgun range, assisting 2 women who were scoring competitors. As Trey sat in the open doorway, far from the outdoor pistol range, danger approached quietly and invisibly in the form of a single bullet. Outside on the outdoor firing line, competitor Dan Smith stepped up to shoot. He stood at the 15-yard mark, unknowingly ahead of 2 sets of protective safety baffles. Smith was using a modified firearm. As he fired, an unexpected second shot discharged during recoil, a phenomenon that occurs too quickly for the shooter to react. The bullet missed its target, traveling high and to the left. Moving at approximately 1,200 feet per second, the bullet cleared the berm by just 3 inches. It tore through the range's aluminum siding, passed through a storage room, narrowly missing pipes and a broom, and entered the airgun building. After striking a ceiling tile, it inexplicably altered direction, turning downward at a 10-degree angle. Now traveling around 900 feet per second, the bullet pierced a plaster wall and struck Trey in the head. He died instantly. Butch, just outside the building, heard a scream and turned to see his son collapsed, blood running down the side of his head. The scene that followed was filled with confusion and horror. Forensic investigators later reconstructed the bullet's path in painstaking detail, revealing the shocking truth. The freak accident was the result of a dangerously flawed range design. The Cooley family filed a legal claim against the shooting club and those responsible for the event. In the end, they received a settlement exceeding $3 million. More importantly, the Dallas Pistol and Revolver Club permanently shut down its outdoor range and implemented structural changes to bring the remaining facilities up to proper safety standards. Trey Cooley's death was preventable. Though his life was cut tragically short, the changes that followed his passing show that safety should never be disregarded in environments where even the smallest failure can have fatal consequences.